Frogman Friday.
Yeah, boy. What's up, guys? It's that time again. Welcome to the Frogman Friday Show.
Presented by Transcend, the best peptide and hormone therapy. They put your health first so you can live more and worry less. Go to transcendcompany.com/Birdman to begin your wellness transformation today.
Today, our badass guest is Mario Romero, Navy SEAL, 8 years of service, Petty Officer First Class. He's one of the lead engineers for AI&T at Intuitive Machines, formerly serving at NASA. You can follow Mario on social. Handles will be linked to the show. And to take a deeper dive, go check out intuitivemachines.com. Brother, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's
Dude,
been a while since I've been a guest on any podcast, but this is awesome.
Dude, you should be a guest on every podcast. You are a very unique Navy SEAL for sure. And I want to dive into all of that. So before we get into the cool stuff that I understand nothing about, and I'm probably just going to keep my mouth shut because I'm an idiot, let's dive into your transition because, you know, it's one thing to have a dream to become a Navy SEAL and then make it and do the job, but then leaving that, you know, that's a tough thing for a lot of guys. So talk to us about your transition. What was that like?
I think, when it came to my transition, it was rough. It was really rough because I didn't have a goal. I didn't have a plan. There was like nothing in the works. I failed to establish what I like to call sort of bridges of relevancy to the outside world. When you're in a platoon, you're kind of in this hyper encapsulated place and you don't have that many connections to the outside world. It's usually like the bar scene or the club, drinking and alcohol and partying, that kind of stuff. So when I got out, that was kind of my fallback. I didn't have a plan. And so it wasn't the greatest transition. That's what I relied on sort of for relevance amongst, my friends and group of people. And there was about a year there where it was a sort of a dark, winding road that I ended up getting into a bar fight, got arrested. I got in a couple of bar fights. Luckily, it was self-defense, and the owners of the bar came out and they took my side. And so the cops, even though I did get arrested, had to go to court, they dropped all the charges. So, it really happened. This is like kind of one of my favorite stories is when I was on a pub crawl with a bunch of friends of mine in Pacific Beach in San Diego. And during that pub crawl, it was like a baseball themed. I was wearing like a Phillies jersey, and we were going to the various bars right over there on Garnett Avenue or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And we were at the Philly bar, the bar that represents Philly. And the guy whose jersey I was wearing hit like an in the field home run. And one of the girls that I was with, she kind of turns to me very excitedly and is like, "Hey, your guy, he hit this home run, right?" And I was like, "Huh?" And she was like, "Yeah, he hit a home run." And I was like, "Oh yeah, that's great." And man, I'll tell you, she asked me a very honest question. She just asked me like, "You don't even like sports, do you? You don't even like baseball?" And I felt like for the first time in my life, that was a real opportunity to just be honest with myself, to just like, it felt like it was like 10 seconds, but it was probably only like half a second before I responded. And I looked at her and I said, no. I said, I just don't care about sports. I don't care about stats. I don't care. I don't follow this stuff. It's just not, it doesn't capture me in any way. And in that moment, it felt like I had been sort of burdening myself with what others really concern themselves with. I wanted so much to be relevant among this specific group of people that I burdened myself. And the imagery that I usually explain this with is that I felt like I was carrying these various heavy shields, and on the opposite side of those shields were mirrors in which I really wanted you to see reflections of traits of yourself. That way you could sort of invite me out and always think about me when I'm not around, and that was really important to me. But in that moment, I felt like I just kind of smashed this one shield, this one mirror, and then it became this watershed moment in my life where I was like, why am I burdening myself with what other people think and enjoy? And as I started sort of peeling off these layers that weren't actually me, the one thing that was kind of revealed was astronomy. I've always loved space. I've always loved, in the 80s, I loved the movie The Flight of the Navigator. It was like one of my favorite, that and Predator, and so like, that same girl was like, why don't you go just study astronomy, right? Like that's what you always talk about. That's what you always do after you go to the bars, you get drunk, you go home, you watch your how the universe works, or you watch your. I didn't really know that that was a thing.
Huh.
Um, that I could actually go to school for that. I had the GI Bill. I was like, oh shoot, this is actually a possibility. I could go delve into this world. And trust me, I was terrified of math, terrified of science. I was not a good student in high school or middle school or anything. But honestly, I went through the VA's 52-week long prolonged exposure therapy. I went through therapy for rage, because I was mad. I was like real mad at the world. I was like, it wasn't really depression or survivor based or anything like that from combat. I was just angry. And like sort of all these things together. I started going to school also, started taking a lot of philosophy classes, reading like John Locke, reading. I got really, really big into reading, still am. A thing that happened later in life for me. So all these things was like a perfect storm that allowed me to just sort of not, I guess, eschew all those things that weren't serving me. So like the bar scene, the people that kind of, influenced me to do just that continued bar party, drinking, Vegas, all that stuff. I kind of just like stripped all that out of my life with help from the VA therapy. Like I know people like to talk bad about the VA. I've had great experiences. I still do. Um, but I will say one thing about therapy that it didn't occur to me till later on. Part of the 52-week long prolonged exposure therapy, what that does is it forces you to sort of retell or recount some traumatic experiences over and over and over again on film. And so about 4 months, 5 months into this 52-week long um, therapy, I had sort of a breakthrough that was so infinitesimally small so as to have been like imperceptible by me. I needed the one thing I always say about therapy that I think is important for people to do is that I was never going to be able to identify those incremental improvements that I was making on my own. Like I wasn't capable. I needed sort of an external observer, a dispassionate sort of observer to be like, hey, look, you made this small change in the way you told this story. And so I was able to like have another breakthrough there. So all this kind of happened at the same time. And then I decided I was just going to jump back into school, went to San Diego Mesa College for astronomy and astrophysics. From there, I transferred over to Columbia University in Manhattan. I finished a pure mathematics degree and sort of a concentration in astrophysics. In 2018, I moved down to Houston. I hung out with Chris Cassidy for a while. He ended up hooking me up with a job at NASA where I was helping the astronauts train for spacewalks. I did that for 2.5 years, and then I went to graduate school here for systems engineering because I wanted to get deeper into, the building aspect and exploration. Two and a half. Once I finished that degree, that's when I started in 2022 with Intuitive Machines, where I got to build two lunar landers. We just landed one a few weeks ago, our second one. And I was actually the one who got to name both missions, the Odysseus and Athena. And before we even get to this, uh, one really geeky aspect that I'm sure you'll appreciate, and maybe like your listeners who might not know this, the SEAL platoons, they're filled with people who have their own little niche interests, right? And they like to do their own things, and it's cool and it's neat, and sometimes it's really geeky.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it was astronomy, right? And so I would go out as an instructor at Nyland, dark skies, perfect, very little light pollution, perfect for any kind of observation of various celestial bodies. I would take my telescope out there and kind of geek out with those dark skies. I'd take my nods out there, my night vision. I'd take astrophotography, astrophotos, all these cool things, and I'd get made fun of, rightfully so, by guys, by other team guys. And they would say, I remember it was hilarious because they would always like kind of poke fun at me, but they kind of, they respect that it's my own geeky little hobby. One day I remember them asking, well, what is it that you do with this? What are you doing with all these photos? What are you doing with astrophotography? And I'm like, well, what do you think? What do you think the girls I send these photos to, what do you think their reaction is when I'm talking about like celestial bodies and planets and here's like the moon phases and all this stuff? They love it, right? They love this. Once I drop that every single team guy is like, you got to send me all these pictures. You got to send me this. I'm like, yeah, that's not happening, man. I'm sorry. You got to, you just made fun of me? I don't think so.
I picture now a whole platoon showing up with their telescopes and
Oh, yeah.
trying to figure out like, hey, am I using the right app with the good filter
Yeah.
on this? That's awesome. Let's take it back because I mean, so first off, I love that you mentioned that it's so unique how you're accepted for your own excitements in the teams because when I showed up, I was a skateboarder. And, you know, you show up, I was like 20 years old and I'm bringing my skateboard everywhere we go. And all these guys are just like, what are you doing? And on the weekends and then time off training, I'm at the skate parks with, you know, there's kids there. They're like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I'm skating and I enjoy doing this. And then they watch me do it and they're like, oh, okay, you're serious about this stuff. And it's kind of funny how they're like, you know, as long as you do your job, it's cool who you are. And so everybody's so different. There was not another skater in the platoon. Ended up some guys started to do it. I want to go back to the girl who had this random conversation with you in the bar. Whatever happened to her?
I still occasionally will chat with her. She's back in, she might be in like San Francisco right now, or she's somewhere in California, but I still like, I have her to thank for a few things. She kind of inspired. I mean, she was just one of kind of those hang along friends in this gaggle of like a dozen or so of us that would always meet for random pub crawls. But she was observant, you know, she knew that like I was not interested in sports, and then she also had the wherewithal to suggest just go study astronomy. That's what you're interested in,
That's
which is
amazing, man.
well.
That is amazing. That's a true friend right there. Somebody who can step outside and call you on your shit too, which is awesome. All
Yep.
right, well, let's dig into this, man. And you know, I want to talk about that flag behind you. You're getting into an area that is so fascinating. It's always been on the forefront of people's minds. People have always looked up to space. They've always wondered, you know, and the questions of just the things we don't know. And I've also dabbled into looking at astrophysics. I took the cheap version where I read the books that you can buy online and buy on Amazon, so I can just get a top view of what this looks like. And I'm like, ooh, this is some work. When you started to go this direction and study, is there a specific area that you wanted to go into right out of the gate, or did you just get studying into it to learn the vast majority of what it is?
I've always been deeply interested in dark energy, what it is that's causing universal expansion. That's kind of the thing that has, because if that consists, or our universe is composed of roughly 70% of this dark energy, and anything that we don't really fully understand or have a good grasp of, we just kind of thrust that label dark to. It's not that it's this, not that it's this like ghostly or ghastly ideology or idea. It's just this thing we just don't know too much about, right? That's really where it started. I wanted to understand why things are moving away or seem to be moving away at an increasing rate is really what's happening, because it's fascinating. I mean, who doesn't find that stuff fascinating? However, as I was going along, by the time I got to Columbia, the way they have their courses, uh, if I were to maintain the astrophysics track and continue that study, I would have had to tack on at least another year, because there were only certain classes taught per certain semesters, and so I didn't have enough GI Bill, and I certainly wasn't going to pay out of pocket for a Columbia degree. So I had to switch over to something I can finish on time with enough of my GI Bill, and it was pure mathematics. And I still retained sort of that concentration in astronomy and astrophysics from San Diego Mesa. But yeah, I mean, like I said, who doesn't? Everyone is. I mean, maybe not everyone, but at least every child, every kid. And here's what I'll say about um, the study of astronomy and the study of just things that allow you to retain that sort of childhood curiosity, that wonderment. I think that's one way for me to stay young. I love, I you know, it's hurtful when you encounter something. It hurts your ego when you encounter something that you just don't know. But I almost grown to love that hurt, because it's like, ooh, but yes, there's just so much there I can delve into. I'm like, you're a white belt all over in every other subject, right? And it's like, to some people that's like, ooh, they don't like to feel that. I love it. I love it because, and I admit it, I'm ignorant on almost everything, right? But like, that's an opportunity to learn. So one of the things that I kind of like, I always have this particular question whenever I meet anybody that's in law enforcement or military currently. I always ask them what kind of self-policing, self-checking mechanism internally do they have for themselves so as to so that they can consistently check in with their own mind. So they're not slowly being, you know, grinded down by the everyday life of having to confront that seedier underbelly of society. Imagine if you're a cop or you're in the teams, you know, you're constantly going after bad guys, you're the probability of confirmation bias taking hold and that becoming your everyday life. If you're consistently looking for the bad in life, over time, you're going to find it everywhere because that's going to be what you sort of look for. For me, like I realized when I was in the teams, it was like so many people are a little bit bitter, like people at the 20-year mark, 25, 30, they seem to have lost that wonderment, that joy, that playful, youthful sort of curiosity. They have been grinded down by that confrontation day in and day out. And so for me, I was like, I want to do something that's like, I get to just be that kid in my mind. And that is space for me. And so when I did the physics and math and then I went to NASA, I wanted it even more. So I was like, all right, well, now I want to build the spaceships that go because, and then explore and then dig and, you know, assess what kind of volatiles there are on the lunar surface or just below the lunar regolith. And so for me, a lot of this is about, it's like skateboarding, right? Like I was a skater too. It's like about doing things that like you get to stay young. I mean, we can't skate forever because we're just going to break our hips eventually, right? But it's about like the ability to have the perspective on life that it's this joyful experience, that it's like this. I love that. I want to keep that. And that's why I am where I'm at right now.
That's amazing, man. Can you, for the listeners, kind of discuss a little bit of the difference, top view, between astronomy and astrophysics?
Yeah, astrophysics generally and astronomy can just deal with like, you know, understanding and learning constellations and various celestial bodies, the planets, the moon, the various moons, the larger objects, the nebula, the gas giants, the, you know, just the various objects in space. Whereas astrophysics, it's a lot of the same things, but astrophysics tends to delve in the mathematics behind the movement of some of these bodies and the rates and the movements and really just the math that deals with the math behind it and the forces that are sort of imposed on the various bodies and what they do to each other and how they can interact. But so it's not that much different. There's just like a little bit more mathematics in astrophysics realm.
It's interesting. It's very relatable to so many things outside of, you know, astronomy. Physics is everywhere. It's everything. What's that? Neil, how do you say his name?
Oh, Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Yeah. Whatever his, you know, I know there's some people that love him, some people that aren't so excited about him. But one thing that is interesting is he was talking about the stars and how everything was pitched during the night of the Titanic sinking. And it's like you can track back to this stuff and understand so much more about what was happening. And it's just really cool to understand and be able to pull that information, that data, because then it gives real context to what's truly happening. And so,
well, like Carl Sagan says, we were like at the infancy sort of our species, we have been a species dependent on understanding the movements of the celestial bodies. We've depended on astronomy, even like our birthdays, like we don't think about it, but that's all astronomy. It's about like the revolutions around the sun, you know, where we are in time and space. And we were much more dependent for harvesting, for, you know, our agriculture. We're a little bit more detached from that now, unfortunately, I think. But I mean, we as a species have been so entirely dependent on it.
So interesting, man. Well, I was like, so we got some things behind you. Obviously, we talked about, you've got the Declaration, the Bill of Rights. What else you got back there? Constitution.
Yes.
But there's one thing up above you that we can see clear as day, which obviously is an American flag. If you don't know what that is, then, you know, you can punch yourself in the face. However, that's special, that American flag. So you want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. This flag is one of about a dozen that were made in the 1970s, and they're made of the material that gets sewn onto the EMU. The Apollo astronauts each had one of them sewn onto it so they can walk, you know, do whatever their EVAs on the surface of the moon. the missions to the moon were never intended to end as soon as they did. Unfortunately, the public lost appetite. We realized that we beat the Russians to the Soviets to the high ground, and they weren't going to be capable of doing the same thing for a long time. So when they shut down the Apollo program, there was several of these flags left over of the actual material. And at my company, because we've already launched and landed 2 vehicles on the moon, NASA thought it'd be a good idea. We work in partnership with NASA. We deliver some of their payloads, some of their science experiments. They gave us a couple of these in order to put onto our vehicle. We offered, hey, we'll sew them onto our vehicle and send them to their rightful home where they belong, back to the moon. And because we got a whole bunch of them, we've already sent 2 up. One of my bosses was like, because I'm one of the lead engineers, he gifted me with one of them after our first mission. And so instead of like leaving it at my desk at work, I find it's such a valuable, for so many reasons. Obviously, it's the American flag, right? I have the American flag tattooed on my back. And it's so meaningful in so many ways, but even extra when it's actual flight hardware, flight gear. And I threw it in a frame and hung it just above the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and the Bill of Rights and the Declaration of Independence.
That is incredible, man. To have that piece of history right there on your wall, that's special, man. That is really neat.
Yeah, that's why it's nice and high up. It's the first thing you'll see when you walk into the office.
That's so awesome. So that's it. I mean, that really, it's like a big question that a lot of people ask is why did the Apollo missions end and why have we not gone to the moon since? I mean, a big reason for that was the appetite of the American public or the world.
Well, I mean, you can think about it in terms, there's like a mathematical or kind of like an economic term for it. It's the law of diminishing marginal utility. I know it's a mouthful, but it's like, if you think about it, like if I were to give you $1 million right now, just hand you $1 million, your excitement level would be at a 10, right? And then let's say I waited like 3-4 minutes and I said, hey, here's another $1 million. That excitement level might be like a 9.5, but it could never be that 10. So over time, there's that diminishing, return. And sort of that's kind of what happened. That's the public appetite. You have so many people tune in on TV and less people the next time, and then less, okay, we've already done that. What's next? What's next? And so there's that sort of component to it, but there's also really that there was no longer a benefit for us to go there. We were in a Cold War with the Soviet Union, and NASA was moving that war into like more of the civilian area sector of the competition. And once we realized that they were nowhere near close to getting to the moon, there was, okay, so why spend 4% of the GDP on that anymore? Let's divert funds. And it's almost always about money, right?
Yeah.
So if they can better utilize, or what they suggest, better utilization of that money, then they're going to do it. They're going to chop it from that. We've already established that we're there, which is what a really funny joke that Neil deGrasse Tyson said a few years ago was, if you want to put American boots on the ground on Mars, someone should leak out a fake memo from China that says they have a plan to put boots on the Mars in 2030, right? Because then America would be there in 2027. We'd be there like a year, 2-3 years earlier, just because. But like that, that's how it goes, right?
The propaganda.
Yeah. And so like, it's great because like, it's this human need, this exploration. It drives us to want to achieve more, but there's always this weird things behind it. When we launch rockets into space, yeah, we're launching satellites, we're launching material to discover, to investigate, to interrogate various other celestial bodies or just atmospheres or whatever. But what we're really testing are delivery platforms for weapons, right? That's unfortunate, and I wish it wasn't that way, but that's really so much of what it is. So we can, under the guise of sending people to the moon in the 70s, or that Saturn V, we're testing like intercontinental ballistic missiles. We're testing all these things. And so, I don't know, there's a lot of weird, not quite nefarious, but there's these ideas subtending these larger leaps in human, achievements.
So that's 2 questions that I'll throw into it, because again, I'm like getting into nerd mode right now because I want to learn so much, and you're giving me this crash course, which is again over my head. One, are we creating technology that's actually, because you hear about, the potential for meteors in 2027 or 8 or whatever, 2032 that are coming closer to the Earth, and they'll still miss it, but there's a potential that it could, change its axis or whatever and come closer and impact us. Do we have capabilities to actually or deter those things or redirect them so that we actually have, nothing hitting the surface?
I mean, we do. We can, and surprisingly, it doesn't take much. If you have something that's heading our way, let's say 2032. I know the specific asteroid you were talking about. I think that the probability for that has dropped significantly. It hit like a scale that was concerning, like for like a week there, but then it kind of fell off. But you can imagine just sending several, you know, sort of spikes with solar sails on it that just slightly adjusts the temperature, which causes a slight adjustment in the way it's, or the travel path, the path of travel. And you just do incremental enough that over time, as it sort of translates that distance towards us, it will have moved to such a great degree that it's not a worry, right? And so we have these things. We just like should probably invest more in it, right? We shouldn't like wait to the last minute and then think we can nuke it, because that would be much more expensive.
Right.
And that would be like last minute, and we could use that as an option if the first several fail. But we have technology. I feel like we could spend better um, on protecting our planet. It's our only home.
Well, I mean, if they send up an Armageddon team, I'm sure that you're going to be on it to sit on the asteroid and blow that thing to smithereens, which would be sweet. It's crazy. It's like I relate it to sniper because I was a sniper,
Yeah.
and so you miss at a very close location and your angle, you're still going to be on target. But out at distance, if there's just like a little tiny hairline deviation, you're going to miss at massive distance or great distance when you're far out, because just the game of angles, right? So
Yep.
same scenario there. Second question. I always look at how you're adding satellites to the orbit. And so now you see this picture of when it was like in the 40s, 50s, or 50s, 60s, 70s. And now today there's satellites everywhere for communications and all this stuff. And there's so much population around the globe for your flat earthers. It is still a circle. And so how does a rocket get out through that stuff without smashing everything?
So it's space is really big, right? Like I think like it's a great question, because it's like the way I used to think also, but there is so much empty space that the idea that we have so much junk, there is a lot of junk, don't get me wrong, there's plenty of junk, and we should do, maneuver to reduce this and maybe set a net or capture or do whatever it is that we can to depopulate that low Earth orbit and sort of mid Earth orbit region. But I mean, you got to think like, imagine you're driving, across a town and there's one car somewhere in that town. You're like, we don't really worry about that, because it's like, the town is pretty big, right? Several miles wide, several miles, and it's like, even that seems like small compared to space, because it's big and it's hard. I think I can only, and I don't even think I'm that good at this. I think I can only like mentally comprehend the space as I sit right here, maybe a football field, but maybe not even that. Like, how do we think in terms of spaces that are huge? Our brains just aren't designed. We're not like, we haven't evolved to think in like, so it's a common question. It's a good question to get, because it kind of just reveals like how we think about space. But there's a lot of it out there. We haven't been launching like 4,000 rockets a day, every day, into space. That would start filling it up. Even that might be plenty of space, but yeah, I don't know. We're not really too worried about it. So
Interesting.
part of what the worry does come from is when you have some kind of object. Maybe somebody forgets to tie in a bag that's doing a spacewalk and extravehicular activity on the ISS, and it ends up floating away. Then you can actually sort of calculate, its path, and then every sort of 90 minutes, depending on, you know, the how the International Space Station is going, you can move around the space station to deviate or to sort of build more space between that so that you don't get hit later on. And then some of that stuff will usually just burn in through the atmosphere. A lot of that stuff eventually does. But yeah,
Interesting.
there's a lot of space.
That's crazy to think about. I mean, my wife and I and kids were flying to Florida just on a vacation. We were sat down next to this guy. It was super nice to the kids, and you know, I'm the chatty Cathy, so I'm like, hey, so tell me about yourself. And he told me he was an engineer for NASA, and I was like, man. And I shook his hand because what I truly believe is like, don't get me wrong, astronauts are super rad, and I think at one point every kid wants to be an astronaut, go to space. But the engineers are the ones who actually they're like the nurses for the doctors. They're the ones who actually do the job, the work. They perform all the duties to carry out to make these things happen. And that's right where you're at, man. I mean, you
Yeah.
guys are the true designers and creators and visionaries of this stuff, which is so rad. So let's tap.
I would even go one lower than that. I would say the technicians are like, because I work with the technicians, and these are the people that don't have the degrees, right? But that have the experience that when I'm around them, I keep my mouth shut, right? Because like I'm not gonna go. It's like now that I'm like degreed up, and it's like the officer level, right? And then you have like the technicians that are kind of like enlisted, even though that's my people.
Yeah.
Like those are the people I go to. Those are the people I credit. Those are the people that like, you know, put in the work. Those are the ones that are like the ones getting after it. And that's why, even though I am an engineer, most people at my work that come in, they assume I'm a technician, and not because, I mean, and it's primarily because I'm not behind a screen. I'm turning wrenches. I'm with the technicians. I'm doing whatever. I'm always there with them because I feel like those are my people. I go to the extra early technician morning meetings when I don't have to, just because those are my people, because I feel like they are the ones that are doing the thing. You know, they're putting in so much work. And yeah, engineers are great. They're fine. They're fantastic. But like even the techs are the ones that are the ones getting after it. That's where I feel like I belong. That's why I'm always with them.
Nice, man. Well, shout out to the techs. That's awesome. Let's dig into being an engineer and anything related to what you're doing. And let's talk a little bit about Intuitive Machines. I've never heard of this company before. Obviously, I wouldn't have. Tell me about what the initiatives are Intuitive Machines and what you do for them currently.
So Intuitive Machines kind of started out as an I think the original idea maybe a decade ago was you know, to deliver, to establish and sustain a lunar economy. So what we do is we build one, like a singular platform that's a six-sided shape, and we're like an Uber service or a taxi service. And so we build this platform capable of carrying X amount of weight, and we deliver various payloads to the moon for NASA, for various universities, artwork. We delivered from I forget who the famous artist is, but I installed one of his artworks. So we just deliver anyone who wants to send anything to the moon for, you know, research purposes or data services or whatever. We build the platform, and then we can take their payloads. We'll install it on our vehicle. We'll even design their payload for them if they want us to do that. And so that's kind of like what we do for that project. We have several other projects in the works. We just won a contract for the Near Space Network Systems, which is just like a low Earth orbit and beyond communication system, so that we can maintain communications all around the globe, but also beyond the moon and everywhere in between. That's another big contract. We're also, another thing that I've done is that we're doing is we put in a bid for, you remember the Apollo astronauts driving on that buggy on the
Yep.
moon, the lunar surface? So NASA's put in a request to build another one of those LTVs, the Lunar Terrain Vehicle. And so as soon as they made the announcement, about 11 different companies, 14 different companies put in, you know, bids to get on that, to build a prototype. And 11 of them were immediately wiped off. And we were one of the 3 that got chosen to build a prototype, the static prototype, and a drivable. And so we got some money from NASA to build these 2. We built them, we delivered them, and then we got them back in September. we're making all those adjustments, all whatever it is that they requested, because they do these fine-tooth sort of like ergonomic inspections on them. And what we did is we got a couple of the Apollo astronauts, a bunch of other astronauts, but we got a bunch of the Apollo astronauts to come out and actually sit, with us, Jack Schmidt, Charlie Duke. We got them all to come and sit and give us their input on what they felt could have been better from the Apollo era and how we can fix it. And my role, because I worked at NASA doing EVA spacewalk stuff, and I worked on ICRs, which is just incapacitated crew rescue. Sometimes we do in the pool with the mock International Space Station, we would pretend that one of the astronauts would go unconscious and the other one would have to recognize it. And you're on a timer, you're on a clock, and you'd have to, secure everything you're doing, make your way all the way to the other astronaut, secure yourself to that person, and then get them all the way into the airlock. And then that's when we would stop the clock. Everybody has to pass several of these before they qualify as flight capable or crew ready or whatever for the missions. Because I participated in that at NASA, I got to be on the incapacitated crew rescue sort of procedure development team. And it was me, and it was actually another Frogman. I worked before I got to NASA. I met up with a Frogman, one of my old buds instructors. I got him a job with me at NASA. And then when I left NASA and I started IM, during my first interview, by the way, I told them, hey, I got another guy I think you guys should hire with me. And it was him. So I kind of just bring this guy with me everywhere I go. I don't know if you know Kiwi Laws, instructor Laws. He was the second phase when I was at Buds. He was an East Coast guy.
Okay.
East Coast guy, yeah.
Got
Key
it.
Waden. But he so I got to do the procedure development. I got to get in the spacesuit on the LTV, our prototype, and sort of give my input and write the procedures for how the one that's not incapacitated will rescue the one that is incapacitated. And we built this extension arm that will come down and pick them up. And I got to be the test dummy for a while, and I got to do that. So that's another thing that we're doing. We also have like this Nova D, this new concept, which is going to deliver huge payloads, very, very big. It could actually deliver the lunar terrain vehicle itself. That's how big this other delivery system is. And then there are at least two other contracts, at least two. There's probably more, but that I don't know that I can talk about those yet. But we're doing a lot of stuff. We're doing a lot of really neat stuff. We launched our first one and landed. We tipped over both times, unfortunately, but like we were able to conduct like almost 100% of the science on the first one. And on the second one, we were able to conduct well over 50% of the science that we wanted to determine, even though it sort of tipped. But yeah, this is what we do. And you're gonna have to send me. I'm gonna send you something. I'll get your address later, and I'm gonna send you something to get your kids to autograph something, and I can put these on, the vehicle and have them send their names and stuff to the moon if they want.
Oh my gosh, that's insane. So that brings me to a massive question here, because when you talk about being able to bring payloads up to the moon or out there into space, is it a contained payload where it's taking itself out, or does it have to attach to somebody else like NASA's or a SpaceX rocket, or does it go on its own up?
So we use the Falcon 9, the SpaceX Falcon 9, and that all that does is take us to low Earth orbit. From low Earth orbit, we break off of their passive ring, and then we go fly on our own. We may do one orbit around the planet, and then we're off to the moon.
Okay.
And then from there, it's all our own technology.
And big enough to take one of the, what is it called, LTIs?
The LTV.
LTV, to take an LTV.
Yeah.
So are you saying that at some point we're going back?
Yes. Yeah.
wow.
Oh yeah. We're gonna deliver. And one of the neat things about the LTV that we're building is that we're doing it with remote capability. So you don't even need astronauts there to drive this thing around on the surface of the moon, to sort of dig out, to investigate with mass spectrometers, to like, interrogate the volatiles that are, underneath on the surface and just underneath the lunar regolith, the sort of dust and dirt. And in the shadows, in the craters, because we want to know, obviously we want to know how much water we can eventually pull out. And so one of the neat things about our Nova C lunar lander is it's powered by a mixture of LOX methane, like liquid oxygen, and methane. We could use different fuels, but we kind of led the path. We were the first company to burn an engine in deep space with this mixture. And this mixture is important for humanity to move towards because remember, these elements can be sourced from the ground on Mars. They can be sourced, potentially on the moon, but definitely on Mars. And so we're going to have to figure out how we can get fuels from other types of fuels for our vehicles elsewhere. That's not just Earth dependent. So we're kind of like leading the way in various different facets, which is, it's really awesome to be at this company. It's really like, I've never ever loved a job ever. Like who loves a job, right? Like
Yeah.
maybe there are some people out there that do. This is like, I mean, this is the closest I can say I've ever loved the job. And I might actually like seriously love this job. The best leadership I've ever had, better than anything I've had, even in the teams. I know some people are going to be mad about that, but yes, it's true.
That's amazing. Well, walk us through that then, Matt. Walk us through, what does a day in a life look like from start to finish for you?
So it can be different. It can be very different depending on what the project is that I'm working on that day. I usually go in early and hit the morning meetings that, like I said, I don't need to attend, but because I really like all the ground crew there, I always try to like, those are my people, and I protect them from people that are, visitors or other vendors that come in and might be like attitudey or whatever. They're my people. You don't mess with them, right?
Yeah.
But then usually, depending on what the mission is, I'm either turning wrenches, literally turning wrenches, taking measurements, or design. I will design various aspects of the vehicle. They let me sort of institute whole design changes, right? And when you think about something like NASA might require this almost Kafka-esque bureaucracy where you have to get 16, 20 different signatures for permission to make one slight change. And at my company, they kind of understand that we're qualified engineers and that we shouldn't be, sorry, my wife just walked in and the dogs are going a little crazy.
All good.
That they trust us, they understand, they know that we understand tolerances and, they're okay with it. So I really like that. There's not a lot of red tape that we have to cross. And at the same time, there's a lot of trust. There's a lot of trust, which is also great. It makes you want to work harder, right? It makes you want to like ensure that you're doing things right.
This is cool. It sounds a lot like the teams once you're at a team, right? You
Yeah.
show up for Monday morning muster, word of the day, you get your word of the day, and then you're either working on putting a double stack duck together or you're working on getting prepped for a training block or, that's it. So it's always new. It's always different. It's being creative. Although you guys get to be a lot more creative. We kind of have our set ways and you are developing things there's need. So let's go back to the moon real quick. Cause again, I'm going to nerd out here. What are you looking for on the moon right now fully?
Well, for this specific mission that we just, for IM2 Athena, we were looking for water. We were looking for water specifically at the south pole of the moon. And that's because that's where we want to send astronauts. And again, we want water for all of its life-sustaining properties or potential, but for fuel, for everything that we need water for our systems and everything else, drinking, everything, to extract hydrogen, to breathing, or oxygen for breathing. And so water is kind of a big deal. And we were looking at the South Pole of the moon for a lot of different reasons, but the South Pole has, a lot of craters. It's very like volatile environment. And yeah, we also want to go, and remember, we're still sort of in the infancy of our intellect when it comes to this. So we're going and we're testing out all this equipment. We're ensuring that this stuff works, so there's like multi layers to this. But if you can imagine that we want to have a long-term presence on the moon, we want to know that we can source a lot of this material that we need to survive. And even if you think about, we have some payloads, for example, that do really neat stuff. We had these 4 cameras on our one of our landers that it was called the Scalps. It was, I forget what the acronym stands for. It's like stereo, lunar, plume, stereo camera, lunar plume, something. And so its job was as our vehicle is coming down to measure the plumes, the lunar regolith, the dust, how it sort of flows. And all we need is a couple of snapshots of that, because then we can gauge the distance we need for if you have like a human habitat at a certain distance, we want to know that when we land resupply or new people or new missions, it's at a safe, minimum safe distance to not sort of inundate, I guess, that the life-saving equipment, the air, the breathing, all the stuff with this dust. So even these things are studied, so we study all these things with every new mission. So yeah, so we're
That's
looking for everything, not just water. We look at everything.
so at some point they're talking about making if they find the water, because you don't know that water's there, or you do know it exists. You're just
We
trying to find
do,
it.
yeah, we do know that there is water. Water has been found. We want to understand the concentration levels of water, the amounts, the concentration, and the depth at which you can find it on just underneath the surface. We want to know basically how readily available it is and how easy it's going to be to get to.
Wow. This is crazy. Well, I'm going January of next year. I'm going to the South Pole in the United States, or I mean, in the United
Awesome.
States, in the world. I'm going to the South Pole, and so I will be thinking about you, because I know where we're going is a lot easier than where you're
Yeah,
trying to go, for sure.
bring me some water.
For sure. So that gets me to another point. So we're focusing on Moon, but we're also hearing a lot of talk about Mars and like the capabilities, trying to get something out there. Actually, let me back up. Before that, you talk about being able to bring your payload to the Moon. Once you depart from the Falcon, what is the time frame from your departure to actually getting to the Moon?
We can do it pretty fast because we don't have because we actually have an engine and we burn our fuel. We can get there in about 8 days or 7 or 8 days ish. Whereas you see some like Firefly took over a month or something to get there. They just use a different propellant type. We're afforded the ability to move a lot faster. So we're lucky in that aspect. I mean, you gain some and you lose some, right?
Yeah.
But I like if things go wrong with our vehicle in mid-flight, it buys us plenty of time. We can burn our fuel. We can do trajectory correction maneuvers and burn some fuel. So we have a lot more mobility, buffer time, I guess you can say. Error factor sort of built in with it. So it doesn't take us very long to get to the Moon.
It's amazing, though, because there's so much thought that has to go into the contingency planning of this, because it's like, even though you put the contingencies in, you legitimately look at it as a one-shot type deal. Like, we got to get there. So that's a lot of back work to get the thing going. That's the exciting stuff. Almost when you get to the Moon, it's kind of like, okay, great, we did that, but all the work leading up to it was the real fun stuff.
Yeah.
That's pretty neat, man.
What's great? It's great. You get to be a kid, right?
Dude.
Shoot stuff out into space and
I mean,
cool pictures.
when you just said, like, I'm going to send you something, you can put your kids, names or something to send it to the Moon. Like, I almost crapped my pants. I mean, it took me right back to being a kid. That is so awesome. And the kids are going to lose their mind. Let's shift fire to the Moon, or to the Mars. So there was a lot of discussion about Mars today. What is the real focus right now for Mars? Is it legitimately just trying to test what's going on there, such like the Moon, to see what's habitable, how we could turn it into a habitable place?
We have been studying. I remember in 2013, I went down to NASA Kennedy and watched the launch of the MAVEN. I think it was like the Mars Atmospheric Volatile Explorer craft. And that was to study the dissipation rates and content of the atmosphere and why and how it's burning away. Then we have like our Curiosity, our Sphere. We have a bunch of different rovers studying, the soil and subsoil material. But we want like long term. It's the closest, seemingly most habitable that wouldn't require so much. It's a long way away, unfortunately. And the technology, I think the technology to get to Mars, we could have put somebody on Mars, decades ago if we wanted to. That's never been like the sketchy part. The only problem is we're never going to get that person back, right? The
Sure.
real technology is in being able to go there and then come back. And so we want to be able to understand how we can sort of mine the fuel necessary, the sustainability, life sustaining materials from the ground. And, I'm going to quote Carl Sagan every opportunity I get, but like exploration is in our nature, right? That's our next that's the frontier. We we moved from water to land, we moved from land to land, we moved from, land back to deep sea, we moved to from land to low Earth orbit and then to the moon, and then like we're constantly that feeds that inner child in us that wants to explore,
Yeah,
and so that's the next big thing, and I think that will just the discussion fires up a bunch of people, right? Like that's what are we talking about right now? We
for
could be
sure.
talking about anything else, but like, and then we're both like really excited about it because like
That's
it's
so
it's just
cool.
neat. It
It's
really is, and it's an escape hatch. Also, it provides the at least the idea, some comfort in knowing that maybe we can survive as a species. Maybe if we become multiplanetary, maybe we can, you know, beat this because this is, it does. I mean, it's going to be a few billion years, but our sun is going to like it's going to expand and it might burn away the entire atmosphere of this planet. It'll definitely burn that away, but it might engulf the planet entirely itself. And we got to be able to like, we want to keep this consciousness going.
yeah. I mean, now I want to go down that rabbit hole, but I'll hold for now on that one. We'll talk about the sun later on another one because we could go for hours. Um, Man, there's just so much to dissect here. I listened to Elon Musk talk about, saying like, how do we make Mars habitable? And he talked about nuking the poles. Why are the poles so important? And do you see that as an actual solution? Or is that just,
I don't know.
thoughts just right now?
I mean, the density of materials at the poles might be the reasoning for it. There might also be like magnetic, atmosphere stuff involved. I'm not too familiar with it, but I'm, I don't know. I think we would have a hard time convincing people who have the money to do this that why we should do this, right? And in fact, I think Neil deGrasse Tyson said something like this before, or somebody said something like this. Like if we're worrying about terraforming Mars, like first let's prove we can do it here on Earth. Let's
Mm,
prove that we can come together as a species and care about something like our planet, right? And let's show that we can fix this. Let's fix our own house, you know, all the problems that we do have here with like pollution, with like perhaps, the warming of the climate issues and all this stuff. Let's show that we can do something with this first. I mean, we can do them in parallel, sure, but I feel like we could also help our own planet.
100%. I mean, it's an observation I made because, I mean, we're so focused, you hear this new thing, just like, even though Mars is not new, it's the next planet over, right? So
Yeah.
it's obviously the one that we're checking, and obviously there seems to be possibility for it. But to ask these questions from a high school graduate like myself, it's like, why is this so important right now? Other than the excitement of Mars is now in sight of being able to put people.
So I like the way you asked that question actually, because like, why is it so important right now? Can you imagine what it must have been like to be in sort of the medieval times and looking over and seeing the aquifers, seeing all the technology, all these grand, stadiums from like the ancient Roman times and thinking, wow, civilization was more advanced back then. That's crazy. That's crazy to think about, right? And so it's what sort of inspires this curiosity and this excitement about it is knowing that there is a more advanced future ahead of us and that it's possible. We're capable of doing it, right? And so that's always a good thing to sort of I can't imagine living in that medieval era and thinking we missed our chance, right? Like
Yeah.
that was the thing. And so I think this is kind of part of a reason that drives us to want to, it's knowing that possibilities are out there, and it's like good. The advanced era of humanity is still ahead of us, not behind us. And so Mars is next. Let's conquer that. We can do this. We're a tiny little creature in the vast universe, and we're doing some amazing things. And we have the capacity and capability to do these amazing things. That just fills me with like so much giddiness, right? Like so much childhood like excitement.
As much as I get excited about all this stuff, I watched a video. It was on social media at some point, and it was basically somebody laying on the ground. And then this camera like panned away from that person and kept panning away from the earth into space, going deep into space, passing different things, and then it just kept going and going and going. And as I watched this thing, my heart started to sink. Like, oh my gosh, I had no clue that it was so big, so infinite, and that we don't even know truly
Yeah.
what it is. And it's like, man, but I love what you said, man, is about getting it right here
Yeah.
first. This is something that we always talk about. It's like, why are we trying to solve the world's problems when we got homeless here on the streets in our own country, and, you know, fixing these things at a local level and being able to prove concept here before doing it anywhere else. So I think that's, and by the way, that wasn't a political statement. That's just pure fact, you know,
Yeah.
like fix what we can, and then we can, like you said, do it at the same time. So before we get into, you know, a question that I always ask everybody, what do you want to leave people to know about what you are doing, what space exploration is like? How do you want to excite people's minds leaving this conversation?
I mean, I think I already said it. You know, I always my advice for, like I said, or whenever I speak to like law enforcement or really anyone, I think about what mechanism do you have in which you're checking in with your own mind to ensure that you're not being worn down by the daily life, and so that you can retain that excitement, that curiosity. And I even have something as simple as I keep a dry erase. I have whiteboards in my office behind, but I keep dry erase markers wherever I have like mirrors or windows or anywhere. And in my bathroom mirror, where when I'm brushing my teeth in the morning, I'll write like a note. I have a note written up there right now, but I'll write notes like check in with your mind. Like, are things like, are you like being beaten down too much by your daily life? If not, what do you need to do to fix that? Because remember, it's a very finite time that we're here, and we should be seeking those like excitable moments as much as we can. Obviously, you can't do it all the time, but like, man, like there's so much wonder, there's so much beauty, there's so much to that you don't know, right? Like I love like art. Art like always messes me up because when I study art, I always learn that I know much less than what I thought I knew. And so like it reteaches me. I'm a big like Stephen King fan because Stephen King's writings, like, man, it just blows me away how good he is at teaching me that I know nothing about it. And that's exciting because now I want to learn more. And then when you learn more, you realize you know less and less. And so
Yeah.
there's more to learn. And so like that for me keeps me excited about. And like I hope people have something like that for themselves in which they're not sort of just slogging through like as a cog that are asleep. There are things to study and take advantage of and, learn and challenge yourself, and that's good. That's great. That's what I want people to like, to be more like, if they want, they can choose whatever they want to do. But that's what I find most beautiful about being alive.
It's
One of,
great. That's great advice, man. Yeah, I mean, we are all caught up in the daily grind, yeah, in every sector of life. For me personally, it's children. We've got kids that are young, and they, like you said, the more you get older, the less you know. And with kids, you know nothing, and every day it shifts, and there's different phases. But to be able to seek the excitement of life, because we were on this earth for a short period of time, and not just sit in that spinning ball of blackness. It's awesome advice, man. I really love that. Finishing off, final question for you is, who is your hero and why?
whew, I have a lot of heroes. But my number one hero would obviously be my mom. She's number one, like hands down. And uh, the reason is, uh, she came from Puerto Rico when she was just maybe 10 or 12. I'm gonna go deep with this and might go dark, but she got here, she didn't finish school, she didn't even finish middle school. By the time she was about 13 years old, 13, 14, she was kidnapped and held in a shack for 2 years in Florida from Jersey, and she was assaulted year after year, multiple times, got like pregnant, got abused enough to that she had lost children because of it. And then she was able to find her way out of that. And we were poor growing up. We grew up in Section 8 housing. We grew up on welfare. Me and my mom we had to live out of motels at times. And growing up, she kind of just endured a lot, even from her own family. And she even in middle school, we had to bring home like the government cheese blocks, the welfare cheese. We would depend on the food trucks and stuff when we lived in the hood in South Jersey. But like you wouldn't know this then, and you wouldn't know it now about my mom. You wouldn't know that because like she's endured so much, and I don't know how she does it. She's endured so much, and it still sort of maintains that such a positive and she's such a nice person, and she's always like sees the good, and I don't know how, like I'm not built like that, right? Like I don't know who is. So she has every reason in the world to be the most bitter, the most angry person ever, and she's not. And so I'm like, that is a superpower that I don't know where that comes from for her. So I see her, and I'm driven to go do things and to go do things. So, and to be fair, my dad, like he wasn't always in the picture when I was younger. He's fantastic dad though, but his parents all abandoned him when he was like 15 years old. So he was kind of a wanderer his whole life too. Still a great dude, even though he wasn't there much early on. So I was awarded the key to the city from my hometown in New Jersey a year ago. And in my speech, I felt like it was one of the greatest moments for me, because in my speech, I was able to tell them for the first time just how proud I was of them, of my mom, of my dad. And just like, I don't know that they've ever heard that from anyone, first of all, but like, it was just because they really are both my heroes. And I'll tell you one last thing. It must have been like September 29th, something like that Friday of 2005 when I got my SEAL Trident during SQT. I think we were the first like big SQT class graduation to 253. And I remember that day getting my Trident. And from then on, I've always said that getting the SEAL Trident was the second best thing to ever happen to me on that day. And the first best was it was the first time that I can ever recall sitting down and having dinner with my mom and my dad at the same time in San Diego. And it was just because those are my two, heroes. Absolutely. And they're both very friendly with each other. They're very cordial. They're awesome. But yeah, that's probably who I would give that title to, both of them, but my mom really.
It's an amazing story, man. What's your mother's name?
Jenny.
Jenny? Oh,
yeah.
That's amazing, brother. Wow. No question she's a hero and endured all that and then still raised you. And look at what you're doing and how proud I'm sure she is of you and what you've accomplished, man. And to be able to give that back to her in your speech, we don't necessarily know how deep they feel that pride when they've seen the effort they put in, but there's no question she has it. So thanks for sharing. I
appreciate that.
Thanks for sharing that, brother. That's amazing. Well, I mean, we're going to have you on for a second and a third and a 50th because
let's do it.
I'm going to do some research so I can come more articulate next time and educated, but pretty much becoming an astronaut right now. I'm like, is there a learning astronaut type deal where I can just get an online deal?
I did apply to the program, so I'll hear back from them at the end of this summer for the astronaut program. That was one of the goals that I wanted. I just wanted to get an application in there. So it required in 2018, they changed the sort of metric for requirements and that you needed a master's degree. So then that's why I went to graduate school also, check that box. And so I officially applied last year. I don't know that I'll get it because I have all these disabilities from the teams and jiu-jitsu and skydiving and all that stuff. And so we'll see, but why not, right?
For sure, man. I got to set my goals a little higher. I was like, I'm going to try out for the bobsled team because it's low hanging fruit. You don't really need to do it for your whole life in order to be good at it. And so congrats to everything you've done, man. You legitimately, I say this, guys like you are my heroes because it elevates me to want to be the best version of myself. When you talk about that shield that you wear, those many shields you wear with the mirrors, I used to try to emulate and try to be something that I thought people wanted to perceive and see out of me. But now I just try to pull from the greatness of people because it makes me a better person. When I see somebody thrive, I immediately get excited about that. And you're one of those guys from our community that has taken it to a level, like you and Johnny Kim and Cassidy, that have taken it to a level that we all aspire and someday hope that we achieve some level of success like that. So congratulations to everything, man. And this is part one because I'm just putting it in the ether right now that we are doing a part two.
Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for your time, brother. Yeah, it's been awesome.
Frogman